السلام عليكم. بونجور، هلو. مثل ما قال السيد منير بوشناقي، هذا ليس لقاء الأصدقاء، إنما لقاء لكومبليس الشركاء ليس في الجريمة، إنما في ربما الحلول، خاصة الحلول. تسمحوا لي سوف ألقي كلمتي بالإنجليزية، وأرحب بكل أصدقائنا من السيدة دكتورة حياة كتات، الألكسوسي منير بوشناقي له عدة قبعات، أهمها المستشار لليونسكو ولا هيئة الثقافة والتراث في البحرين، وأيضا له دور كبير في إنشاء ما يسمى بال ARCWH، المركز الإقليمي للتراث العالمي في الشرق الأوسط. وتشرفت بمعرفة الدكتور زكي أسلان، رغم أنه نعرف عليه كثير من الإكرام، والصديق الشريك الآخر سليم الهنديلي، وهو من لايف وايرز في اليونسكو، مدير الثقافة وشعبة الثقافة في المكتب الإقليمي في المغرب الرباط، والآن له قبعة جديدة مستنبطة من فيروز لبيروت، وهذه التاسك فورس أو مبادرة التي قامت بها المديرة العامة لليونسكو لإصلاح ما يمكن إصلاح في بيروت، وأتمنى له التوفيق ونهنئه باسمكم جميعا. وأخيرا وليس آخرا، أريد أن أقدم لكم جميعا زملائي أو زميلاتي من المعهد الدولي للسلام، السيدة داليا التي كانت تتناول رشفة الشاي. She just had a sip of tea, and of course Elizabeth Shea. She's now based in Brunei Dar es Salaam, and she's from Singapore. So welcome all of you, and I'm so happy that the IPI MENA with these accomplices is holding or organizing this webinar with not only accomplices but also experts and activists, I would say, in preserving not only culture, science, education as the solution to problems of the international community and the whole globe, but also to focus on one of our mutual or joint concern, which is the World Heritage. Let me start by wishing that you, your families, your countries, and your communities are in good health. So are all your beloved ones within these hard times marked by the plague of coronavirus. I would also like to thank my friend Munir Bouchnaqi for not identifying you, because we know all of you, but also agreeing on bringing you aboard as experts in this crucial topic. The protection and conservation of World Heritage has always been, as is becoming ever increasingly, a crucial criteria to achieve sustainable development and peace. For our organization, the International Peace Institute, and mainly its office in the Middle East and North Africa, based in Bahrain, it is important, or it is an important factor. Enabling durable peace is a shared sense of ownership and understanding of our heritage. This can help bind people together and contribute to their understanding of history. I'm not inventing the wheel while addressing such experts like all of you. I would also note that cultural and world heritage acts, culture and world heritage act as a running thread that interlink and weaves civilizations together. Cultural sites are, in essence, platforms for reconciliation processes. They bring communities together to foster tolerance, understanding, mutual respect, and peaceful coexistence. Ultimately, World Heritage contributes to the development of relations on the local, national, regional, and international levels, and thus creates the roadmap towards peaceful relations, stability, and development on a global scale. As experts as you would agree with me that World Heritage sites and all locations, they constitute in a sort of DNA for us. It's through them that we find the essence of our history, of our heritage, of what have different civilizations contributed to the global civilization. Yet, despite various efforts, our cultural heritage remains under threat from armed conflicts and increasingly complex global challenges, such as, in particular, the coronavirus pandemic. We are here to look into how laws have brought critical restoration and rehabilitation efforts to a halt, whilst simultaneously dramatically impacting the tourism industry, which is a cornerstone of the cultural and also the economic sectors. We have seen African World Heritage sites suffer due to the pandemic, prompting the German Commission for UNESCO to set up an emergency response along with financial support under the theme SOS African Heritage. ASEAN's World Heritage sites have also dramatically taken a hit with the decline of visitors of up to 99%. Let's keep in mind that prior to the pandemic, these sites were forecasted to contribute $563 billion to Asia's GDP by 2027, with an annual growth of 5.7%, which is enormous. The loss of revenue, employment, and livelihoods tied to cultural heritage following the pandemic are enormous. This culminated in an emergency meeting by UNESCO Director General Audrey Azoulay in April 2020 with the ministers of culture across the globe. To put it aptly and to paraphrase Her Excellency, we are in a cultural heritage crisis. We need to ensure that the social, economic, and cultural value of our heritage is acknowledged, protected, and utilized to help local communities achieve social cohesion and sustainable peace. Urgent collective action is needed at the local, regional, and multilateral levels, particularly at a time when the pandemic is showing the seeds of divisions, xenophobic reactions, rising intolerance, and extremism. Needless to elaborate on what we are witnessing in Paris, in Vienna, and so on and so forth. In this regard, my friends, cultural heritage is a key factor towards preventive diplomacy, reconciliation, and integration. I do look forward with my colleagues here, Dalia and Elisa, to hearing from our panelists, our experts, who are, as I said, all of you are experts on this field, as to the situation in the Middle East and North Africa region with forward-looking assessments, I would not limit this to MENA region. You are free to go beyond, because now it is the world is a small village. What happens in any part of the world affects the rest of it. Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum. I would like to give the floor to my friend Munir Bushnaqi, the advisor to the Bahrain Authority for Culture and Antiquities, BACA, and United Nations or UNESCO Paris. Si Munir, you have the floor.
شكرا أخي العزيز دكتور نجيب، ونبدأ باللغة العربية باش نرحب بزملائي ومثل ما قلت شركاء في هذا العمل في مجال التراث الثقافي، ولكن أنا ما نقول شركاء، نقول عائلتي، عائلة الزملاء والزميلات اللي موجودين معنا اليوم في هذا اللقاء المهم. So I want to just thank Dr. Najib for having had this initiative with Mrs. Dalia Al-Alawi, with whom I am already in contact for other webinars. We have already one with the religious leaders in Bahrain and the French ambassador immediately after what happened in Paris. And I think we are people living not in the cloud, we are living on the earth, and we know that the situation of cultural heritage is linked with the day-to-day life. And we have to see, after your presentation, how we are faced actually, in particular, in our job, in our daily job, how we are faced with COVID and how we are reacting to the situation. You have already explained very clearly that the COVID has impacted very seriously all the activities, and in particular, the cultural sector. If you see any declaration from ministers of culture already when Mrs. Azoulay and Mr. Ottone organized the meeting of ministers, they were all very much concerned by the drop of visitors, first of all, to museums, to sites, to monuments, and the drop also in many cultural activities. This is a phenomenon that didn't happen during our life. Today, I received a message from the ambassador, the representative of the Vatican, Monsignor Follo, who told me that this is not the first time. You know, in 1918, there was the what they called la grippe asiatique. There was the Asiatic influenza, which killed millions of people. And he sent me a number of pictures where people were having the mask, and he was saying, I am praying for the end of the COVID in order to come back to a normal life. I think we are all living a non-normal life. But the reaction, and this is, I think, the important point that we should underline, is that thanks to the technology, thanks to the video conference, and all those who are with us today, Dr. Hayat, Dr. Zaki, Dr. Karim, they all participated, and we, in fact, I am with them nearly once a week. We started with an initiative from the Ministry of Culture of Algeria and with our colleague, Dr. Zohair Belalou, who asked me, beginning of Ramadan, that means we are already a few months ago, Munir, can we do some kind of presentation about cultural heritage in Algeria? We have a new minister, and she wants to do something because we are all confined. And my son is a specialist in bureautique. This is how I learned about video conference, you know, because then we learned how to open a meeting, how to close, to unmute, to have slides also. We can, you know, make presentation of slides. And at the end of Ramadan, and colleagues who are here participated to these meetings in Algeria from their own country. And we had a very good conversation, very good exchange of ideas. And I can assure you that the minister was very happy. She was a new minister, and she was very happy to see that despite the COVID, something was done in order to raise the level of knowledge and to present the problems and how to address them. So this was one very important matter. Then we have seen that Alexo, and here we have the director of culture with us, she also organized very important meetings of all archaeologists, the head of the Department of Archaeology of all Arab states. I think this was a very important moment where we were talking and exchanging from Oman to Morocco, through Middle East, through Gulf area, from North Africa. And it was very important for Alexo to gather all these presentations. Of course, Ikram Sharjah with Dr. Zaki was present. Shadia Toukan with the center was present. And this was giving to all of us elements of information, but also what can be done in the future. This is, I think, what today we have as a tool, not to close all the doors. You know, people are living in actually, and Karim knows how is Paris now, like it was in February and March and April, with closed doors, with authorization only to get out for 1 hour, not more than 1 kilometer. But thanks to this system of the Zoom meeting, I think we are having the possibility to go beyond this difficulty and to make sure that through this presentation, we can find solutions. In fact, I have figures. We have seen that Zoom has grown when it started to, to be used beginning of this year, from 10 million in the world. It's a figure for the world, from 10 million to 200 million users. So this is really a phenomenon that we have to acknowledge. And in the field of cultural heritage, I am sure that this is the response that we can give actually to the crisis, the sanitary crisis. I would like also to give an example of a project which is underway in Iraq, the Mosul reconstruction and restoration of Masjid al-Nouri, the Nouri Mosque, and the Minaret al-Hadba, and the 2 churches which are closed and all destroyed, unfortunately, by Daesh. We continued to work with the team in Iraq, and we had a meeting only a few days ago with the Minister of Culture of Iraq, the Minister of Culture of Emirates, the Assistant Director General of Culture of UNESCO, and the experts like Zaki Aslan, like people who are inside Iraq, like the head of the Sunni Waqf, the representative of the church. This is a solution that has given us the possibility to continue a project despite the COVID and despite the difficulties. So this is what I can say as like all of you, as an actor in the field of cultural heritage, not having left everything without continuation, but having this possibility. And I want to thank again Dr. Najib Friji for this initiative, which is giving us another possibility to exchange, to give our opinion about the situation of cultural heritage. It is true that there are many sites which are closed. There are many museums which are closed, but I think that giving this possibility of continuing the discussion, continuing the dialogue, it is opening also an economic openings for the future when we will hopefully come back to a normal life. There are many meetings that we can continue to do without having to travel, because these Zoom meetings are very helpful for our exchange of views and maintaining the social relation between ourselves. Shukran.
Shukran. Thank you, Simonir. That's very, very important. And again, thank you for your efforts for the last decade. You're still very young in the World Heritage in different parts of the globe. We know that you're in Cambodia, in Timbuktu, started in Algeria, Tunisia, your original country, Bosnia, Bushnaki, where you are an honorary citizen, and this goes on and on and on. And your contribution to bringing the World Heritage in our part of the world to the global focus and put that under the lights of the international community are commended. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank
now
you. Just one word. Just one word, because we have a majority of Tunisian colleagues. I want to say publicly that my training in the field of archaeology, in the field of cultural heritage, started in 1965 in Tunisia. Thank you.
And that's why our heritage is preserved. Thank you so much. Now I will invite صديقتي وأختي العزيزة ورائدتنا في الثقافة في العالم العربي مع الأليكسو. أدعو I would invite Dr. Hayat Germazi, the Director of Culture in Alexo, to take the floor. Welcome, Dr. Hayat. The floor is yours.
شكرا جزيلا. أولا أنا سعيدة بمشاهدتكم، وإن كان ذلك عن بعد وافتراضيا، متمنية أن يزول عنا هذا البلاء حتى نلتقي من جديد. سعيدة برؤيتكم جميعا أصدقائي الأعزاء. إذن سعادة الدكتور نجيب الفريجي، مدير المعهد الدولي للسلام، مكتب الشرق الأوسط وشمال إفريقيا. سعادة الدكتور منير بوشناقي، الخبير الدولي ومستشار في الهيئة البحرينية للثقافة والآثار. سعادة الدكتور زكي أصلان، مدير إكرام الشارقة. سعادة المهندس كريم الهنديلي، المسؤول عن قطاع الثقافة في المكتب الإقليمي لليونسكو بالرباط. لا أرى ندى الحسن، اعتذرت. يسعدني أن أشارك معكم اليوم في هذا الاجتماع لتقييم تداعيات أزمة كوفيد-19 على التراث الثقافي في البلدان العربية، وأنتهز هذه المناسبة لأنقل لكم جميعاً تحيات معالي الأستاذ الدكتور محمد ولد عامر، المدير العام للأليكسو، وتمنياته لاجتماعكم هذا بالنجاح والتوفيق في تحقيق الأهداف المرجوة منه. زملاء الأعزاء، السيدات والسادة، ينعقد اجتماعنا اليوم في ظل ظروف عسيرة ومتغيرات عميقة ومتسارعة، وقد جاءت أزمة كوفيد-19 لتكشف للجميع عن دخول العالم منعطفاً جديداً من تاريخه لم تستعد له البلدان العربية للأسف الشديد بما فيه الكفاية. ويتجلى هذا الهون بصفة واضحة وجلية من خلال ما تعرض له القطاع الثقافي بجل مكوناته من أضرار سببها إجراءات الحجر الصحي الشامل الذي فرضته جميع الدول على مواطنيها توقياً من انتشار العدوى بالفيروس. وسنؤكد خلال هذا الاجتماع كما هو منصوص عليه في عنوانه على تداعيات الأزمة الصحية على قطاع التراث الثقافي الذي تضرر بقسمين، المادي وغير المادي، من الإجراءات الصحية الشاملة المفروضة منذ شهر مارس تقريباً 2020. قد ازداد الوضع سوءاً في عدد من بلدان المنطقة جراء الكوارث الطبيعية التي جدت أخيراً من فيضانات وزلازل تسببت في تدمير عدد من المعالم والمباني التاريخية والمواقع الأثرية أو إلحاق الأضرار بها، خاصة تلك التي تقع على مجاري المياه أو في المناطق التي تكثر بها الهزات الأرضية. هذا إلى جانب الحوادث مثل انفجار مرفأ بيروت الأخير والمشاكل الأمنية التي احتدت وتيرتها في عدد من البلدان، وما ينجر عن كل هذا من مخاطر تزيد في تهديد سلامة التراث الثقافي. سيدات والسادة زملائي الأعزاء، لقد انجرت عن إجراءات الغلق الإجباري للمؤسسات المتحفية والمواقع الأثرية أضرارا جسيمة تكبدها القطاع وما يزال يتكبدها إلى اليوم، وسيتكبدها كذلك في الأيام القادمة. ويمكن تلخيصها كما تعلمون في الآتي: أولا، نقص المداخيل كما تعلمون بسبب انقطاع الزيارات، وكان يوظف جانب من هذه المداخيل كما هو معلوم في صيانة المواقع والمتاحف وإثراء المجموعات المتحفية، وكذلك في البحوث والدراسات. طرد أو إخلاء سبيل عدد من الموظفين، ومن بينهم خاصة حراس المواقع الأثرية في الجهات الداخلية، وهذا مشكل كبير نعيشه في تونس مثلا. هذه الجهات كما تعلمون أو المواقع الموجودة بعيدا عن العواصم تفتقر إلى الخدمات والتجهيزات الحديثة مثل كاميرات المراقبة، وتعتمد على الحراس لحراسة هذه الممتلكات. هذا الوضع شجع السراق على النبش في هذه المواقع واختلاس القطع الأثرية، أو حتى تدمير بعض المباني وتحويل وجهة الحجارة لاستعمالها في بناءات حديثة بدون رخصة تكاثرت كذلك وتيرتها اليوم. فقدان القطاع لعدد من الكفاءات للأسف الشديد التي اضطرت بسبب البطالة إلى البحث عن فرص عمل جديدة، وللأسف الشديد العدد منهم لم ينجح في العثور عن عمل مناسب بسبب الأزمة الاقتصادية الناتجة عن جائحة كورونا التي أثرت سلبيا على جميع القطاعات الحياتية. ومما يؤسف له هو كذلك هذا معناها ألمنا غياب القطاع الثقافي أو الموضوع الثقافي في أغلب الخطط التي أعدتها دول العالم وخاصة الدول العربية للخروج من الأزمة، مع أن هذا القطاع تضرر كثيرا من تداعياتها، وقد يكون جزءا من الحل إذا تغيرت نظرة بعض السياسيين وبعض صناع القرار للتراث الثقافي وللقطاع بصفة عامة، من قطاع موجه للترفيه على النفس والتسلية كما جاء عن لسان البعض، إلى قطاع منتج للثروة وموفر لمواطن الشغل ومحرك اقتصادي هام يخضع أيضا لشروط العرض والطلب. وتعرب المنظمة العربية للتربية والثقافة والعلوم عن استعدادها التام والكامل بالتعاون مع المنظمات الدولية والإقليمية الحكومية وغير الحكومية الشاركة ومؤسسات المجتمع المدني والجماعات المحلية بصفتها المالكة الحقيقية للموروث الثقافي، وعدد من الجهات الخاصة الممولة لتغيير هذه النظرة التي ما تزال سائدة في عدد من بلدان المنطقة، وذلك باتخاذ جملة من التدابير أهمها توعية الشباب والأطفال والناشئة. يجب أن نبدأ بهذه الشريحة قبل كل شيء على توعيتها بهذا الموضوع، والمحافظة على التراث الثقافي وبناء القدرات العربية تشجيع الطلبة إلى الانخراط في الشعب المعنية والترويج لمواقعنا ومتاحفنا لتكون وجهة سياحية ثقافية في العالم، والإحاطة بالمبدعين والفنانين وحثهم على الاستلهام من المخزون الثقافي التراثي في منتجاتهم الفنية، وكذلك وهذا الأهم تشجيع الجماعات المحلية المقيمة قرب المواقع الأثرية على إحيائها. كيف تحييها؟ باستثمار مكونات تراثهم الثقافي غير المادي من مهارات وحرف يدوية وعادات وتقاليد وفنون، وتوظيفها في تثمين المواقع عن طريق خلق أنشطة جديدة مستوحاة من التراث وهو ما يسهم في تحقيق التنمية المستدامة. قد يستدعي تحقيق هذا تضافر جميع الجهود من حكومات وخواص ومجتمع مدني، وخاصة أكاديميين من مختلف التخصصات وباحثين وخبراء لتأثير المبدعين والجماعات المحلية. والدعوة مفتوحة لكافة المنظمات الدولية والإقليمية وجميع الجهات المعنية الشريكة للانضمام إلى هذه المبادرة من خلال البدء فوراً في إنجاز عمل ميداني نموذجي متكامل في هذا الصدد. وقد سبق وأن دعونا لهذا في اجتماعاتنا الأخيرة التي عقدناها كما تفضل الأخ العزيز الدكتور منير بوشناقي، إما مع المديرين التراث في الدول العربية أو مع المنظمات الشريكة، وأنا أشاهد على الشاشة الدكتور زكي أصلين، وكنا قد تحدثنا عن هذا، لكن ينقص الآن التنسيق وينقص الآن الإسراع في تلاقي مبادرة جماعية تشترك فيها جميع الجهات المعنية. وفي ختام كلمتي أتوجه بخالص الشكر والتقدير لسعادة الصديق العزيز الأستاذ نجيب الفريجي على تنظيم هذا الاجتماع وعلى اهتمام المعهد الدولي للسلام بموضوع التراث الثقافي، وهذا ليس جديد. الأستاذ نجيب حضر معنا في العديد من الاجتماعات التي قامت بها المنظمة في هذا الصدد، والمعهد هو مهتم بهذا الموضوع من جميع أوجهه، وخاصة في ركن أو زاوية علاقته المتينة بإحلال السلام العالمي المنشود. والشكر موصول لكافة المنظمات الدولية والإقليمية المشاركة وللأكاديميين والسادة الخبراء على جهودهم المبذولة والمتضاعفة في هذا الظرف الدقيق في الحفاظ على التراث الثقافي الإنساني وتثمينه لتوظيفه في التنمية. فأنتم صمام الأمان، وأنتم حراس هذا الموروث الإنساني النفيس والمدافعين عليه في الحاضر والمستقبل. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته.
العزيزة دكتورة حياة، نحن في أشد الحاجة لعناصر نسائية في هذه المنطقة خاصة، وأشد حاجة إلى رائدات في مختلف المجالات. وأنت أريد أن أسأل الله وكل الأنبياء الآخرين أن يعينك على منطقتنا، حيث الآن في كلمتك سطرت ربما التشخيص الصحيح لما تعاني منه الثقافة في منطقتنا، وأشرت إلى أن هناك ربما ضبابية في مجال مهم جدا، ليس على مستوى تكوين الأجيال إنما أيضا على دعم الاقتصاد. وكنت تطرقت إلى كيف أن يكون تكون الثقافة بمختلف قطاعاتها، وخاصة التراث العالمي، من متاحف، من مواقع أثرية، من غيرها. لو يتم الاستثمار فيها لدرت علينا وعلى اقتصاداتنا بموارد هامة جدا. لا أريد أن أنتقص من القطاعات التي تتأثر بأدنى تطور مثل السياحة التي رأينا كم كانت هشاشتها في هذه الظروف. ومثل ما قلت بداية أن بعض البلدان الآسيوية تشتغل على توفير مئات المليارات من الدولارات من التراث العالمي. فشكرا لك على الإشارة على هذه النقاط الهامة، ويبدو لي أنه هذا النصح يجب أن يؤخذ بجدية أكثر على مستوى وزرائنا، مش فقط وزارة الثقافة أو التربية التي أشرت لها أيضا أهمية التربية في تكوين النشء الذي يعي قيمة الثقافة والتراث، ولا نكتفي بطرد الحراس طريقة لمعالجة الأزمة الاقتصادية مثل ما يتم في عدة حالات. فالثقافة هي le parent pauvre الذي يسلط عليه أقول سيف التقشف الظالم في الميزانية، في حين أن الثقافة هي أكبر وسيلة لبناء مناعة المجتمعات من التطرف ومن الحروب ومن العاهات التي يعاني منها مجتمعنا الآن. فمرة أخرى بدون مجاملة، شكرا لك على دورك، شكرا جهود أليكس وكل المساعدين والإخوة الذين معك. والآن أتشرف لأن نسمع بالدكتور زكي أسلان. I know about Dr. Zaki Aslan, who is the regional representative of ICROM in the Arab States and director of the ICROM Sharjah office in the UAE. سمعت عنه الكثير، ليس من عن طريق أخي منير بوشناقي، أيضا من قراءاتي حول دوره ودور الإكرام. ونحن كرواد المتاحف نعتبر الإكرام هي مظلتنا وحامينا، خاصة إذا رأينا أن المتاحف تستهدف مثل ما قالت الدكتورة حياة في الحروب يتم والنزاعات المسلحة، يتم استهدافها من قبل عصابات منظمة تنهب المتاحف ويتم الاتجار غير المشروع بأهم ما تملكه الشعوب. فربما لن أطيل عليكم ونستمع إلى الدكتور زكي ليفيدنا في هذا المجال. تفضل دكتور زكي.
شكرا جزيلا دكتور نجيب، وشكرا على هذه الدعوة لأكون بين الأصدقاء كما ذكر دكتور منير. دكتور منير هو طبعا أستاذنا، وكان هو مدير المنظمة بعد ما ترك اليونسكو. أيضا تحياتي للدكتورة حياة والأخ العزيز كريم. شكرا لكم على هذه الدعوة من المعهد الدولي للسلام في الشرق الأوسط. الحقيقة عندي أنا باوربوينت، ما بعرف إذا ممكن أشترك فيها في السكرين لأنه it's disabled.
ما يقول اللبنانيون من كل بد. تفضل.
It's still not working. اي تمام. اوكي، تسمعوني؟ تمام. حقيقة شكرا مرة أخرى لهذه الدعوة الكريمة. والحقيقة نحن في منظمة الإيكرام التي مقرها في مدينة روما سعيدين أن نكون في جزء في هذا الحديث الهام للمعهد الدولي للسلام، لأنه كما ذكر دكتور نجيب ودكتور منير والدكتورة حياة، فالثقافة وحفظ التراث هم عنصر أساسي في بناء السلام. المنظمة وهي منظمة حكومية مقرها في روما عملت العديد من الأمور التي اشتركنا فيها في الحفاظ على المناطق التاريخية، على المعالم الأثرية، وأيضا في المتاحف. وهدفنا بعد إنشاء المركز الإقليمي في الشارقة في الإمارات العربية المتحدة كان ويستمر في أن نعزز الدور الذي تقوم به الإيكرام منذ إنشائها من قبل اليونسكو في عام 56 في بناء القدرات المؤسسية في العالم العربي. بما أن الدكتور نجيب بدأ في موضوع كيف الثقافة وكيف نستوحي من التراث، أحببت أن أبدأ بهذه القطعة الفسيفسائية من مدينة أريحة، والتي تشكل نظرة لأهمية التراث ونستنبط منه أهمية بناء السلام والعمل معا في أن يكون التراث هذا أيضا مصدر إلهام في الحفاظ على نفس التراث، وأيضا على بناء السلام بين المجتمعات المختلفة. وأيضا أردت أن أذكر قبل أن أبدأ يعني بشكل جدي عن أعمالنا في الإكرام لهذه الأمثلة. هذا مثال آخر لمعرض بين الفاتيكان والإمارة في الشارقة هنا مع المتحف الإسلامي المتحف الحضارة الإسلامية في الشارقة، لعملية أيضا الحوار الثقافي وبناء السلام. وكان يعني هناك تبادل في هذه القطع المتحفية التي من دورها أن تعطي الأبعاد الهامة ليس فقط لمساهمة الحضارة الإسلامية في العالم، ولكن أيضا في هذا الحوار الهام بين الديانات المختلفة. في موضوعنا في فترة التي نمر بها في هذا الوباء، والآن سأنتقل للغة الإنجليزية. Before 2015 and until the rise of the COVID-19 pandemic, the cultural and creative sectors generated about 3% of world GDP and employed 29.5 million people, 1% of the world's active population. These sectors were driving innovation and the new knowledge-based economy, and they were among the most rapidly growing sectors worldwide. In April 2020, 128 countries had entirely closed down their cultural institutions, and 90% of the world countries had closed or partially closed their World Heritage Sites. Of course, the source is from UNESCO, and I'm sure my colleague Karim will talk more about that. In the same period, 95% of the museums worldwide were closed, with 12% of them being at risk of closing permanently, and with 30% of them expecting that the economic impact of COVID-19 would force to perform staff reduction and unemployment. The OECD has estimated that jobs at risk for the cultural and creative sectors across OECD regions range from 0.8% to 5.5% because of the COVID-19 impact. Similarly, for cultural tourism and tourism in general, according to the World Tourism Organization, the expected drop is up to 80% in 2020, with 100 million jobs at risk in an industry that until recently announced for 330 million jobs, 1 in 10 jobs in the world. ICRAM, through its work with the member states, developed tools for identifying risks and monitoring impacts and assessing needs. So if you go to ICRAM website, there are several resources available to guide people whose job it is to preserve cultural heritage and also look into the social impact and economic impact of these cultural institutions. So I think this resource has been actually very informing for ICRAM, and also useful for our colleagues in all member states. So ICRAM continues to work on various programs ranging from Africa, Records and Archives, World Heritage, and many other regions beyond the Arab region as well, Latin America, and other programs that we have also that are related to resilience for cultural heritage in heritage times of crisis. And COVID-19 is one of these crisis. So this program is actually has been leading what I've just mentioned to you as guiding member states as to how they can deal with their objects, sites, and buildings in times of COVID. As you all know, the ICRAM Sharjah Center was established also with the leadership with Dr. Munir Bushnaqi at the time, to lead the work that we have tried to develop in the past 8 years or so to serve the Arab countries. closely with our sister organizations, UNESCO, Alexo, and we continue to do this work. If we look at capacity building, and I mentioned that capacity building is really the main aspect or the main area of our work to work with heritage institutions, we look at the capacity building in a holistic format. We work on professional leadership training that many of you know about, but also we disseminate knowledge. We have policy think tank meetings, and also we try to have, through our outreach programs, several types of activities to reach the communities in the region. And with that, we have also some field projects that we work on. So how our work has been impacted in the past years, if I start with the meetings, we had also initiated this year a program called Medina program, and we had although we started the work in Essaouira a year ago, but we have continued, and we are now trying to see how we could build synergies with Alexo also and their observatory program to see how we could develop work related to Medina in many areas related to urban cultural heritage and urban landscapes. So this is something that we are now continuing to do, and that includes risks to cultural heritage in these places. I'm just trying to give you some examples, which in fact have turned out to be online. In the capacity building, we have established the master program, which is now delivered online, benefiting all the Arab countries. People come from all countries in the world. This is the second cycle that we have started this year. This master degree program will help people also to deal with such conditions and how to preserve cultural heritage, to build social cohesion and resilience in many places. So all these were converted online. Dr. Munir mentioned the Mosul project, in which we are involved also in providing capacity building work for the reconstruction of the Al Nouri Mosque and its Hadba minaret, together with Al-Tahira Church and the Clock Church, Sa'a. And this has been postponed, but we are starting to deliver online to the Mosul people all the requirements to build or rebuild their city in the methodological approaches that we have developed in the past few years. One of the important projects that we have been involved in lately is the Sudan project, and this is actually very much related to areas that we have you have mentioned in your interventions earlier. This is in Sudan. It's a project called Western Sudan Community Museums, where conflict was, as you all know, in Darfur was taking place for many years. These museums became hubs. Not only our work was focusing on the buildings, which are historic buildings in this case, for where these museums, are located and house, important objects for the community, but also to work on the intangible dimension where social cohesion is really important in places like Darfur. These are few images of the training that we have done that ranged from, as I mentioned, built heritage collections, but also to how we can engage the communities so that these cultural places become hubs for the people of Sudan, coming from various tribes who were at odds at time, to come together, celebrate their common heritage, including, all the intangible facets like dancing, as you see here on the screen, folklore, and many others. So these museums now are not really only museums with walls, but also museums beyond the wall, outreaching communities, and actually centers for meeting of communities to come together where heritage unite them. In the area of outreach and advocacy, we have initiated the program called the Arab Cultural Heritage Forum. And this year is going to be conducted online. I have to say that there is one session that Dr. Munir will be taking part in next week, addressing issues that would be of your interest at the Institute related to cultural diplomacy and how we could, as people of the region, present our heritage, but also how we could exchange ideas and enhance dialogue between different cultures. So this is going to take place. And of course, this forum is really beyond the professionals working in heritage. We have also people coming from the cultural sphere, including actors, as you can see, musicians and artists, etc. In the area of knowledge dissemination, we have continued to have these published material, and I think these were useful. I mentioned, for example, the case of Beirut, where our guidelines were used, and we have been following this with our colleagues in Lebanon, how to utilize, the guidelines that we have developed as first aid after disaster. And this is just one example, but in fact, these published material online have helped people and practitioners to face catastrophes such as Beirut, but also guidelines to face risks to cultural heritage. And as I mentioned, there was one new facet related to COVID-19. And then I wanted to just mention our award program for cultural heritage projects and practices that bring people together to look into success stories of how conservation should be done, looking at its social impact, but also economic impact in a global sense that would help in sustainable development. This is a picture from last year's event, where the winner was actually a historic city near Bethlehem in Palestine. So I just wanted with this to give you a quick idea of our work and how we have been working with member states in the past few months. And I congratulate you to convene such a meeting, recognizing that culture and cultural heritage are important factors to build peace for societies, because our work go beyond the objects and the materials, but also to benefit communities and inhabitants in these historic places. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Zaki, for first intervention with us. This has been a real breakthrough. You opened our eyes. I mean, we know about ICRAM, but with this presentation, you have enlightened us further on how important the work of your institution is. And we're glad that you are based not far from here in Sharjah. And I'd like to tell you that as far as your activities, you can count on IPI New York, Vienna, or Manama as your partners. And as for your, I mean, in all sectors, I would say, basically, or in particular, as far as your forthcoming activity related to cultural heritage diplomacy, I will pledge our full support and participation if need be. And I would add that it would be very important to add the preventive diplomacy to protect world heritage, because usually the international community or the concerned players and parties intervene when world heritage is or has suffered, like the sad picture you showed us in Mosul or in different museums like the Museum of Baghdad or the sites of Buddha in Afghanistan, or the Palmyra sites that had been the targets of the extremist movements. Sadly, acting in the name of Islam, and Islam is innocent from them, as we say, Islam bara'un minhum. And as you remember also our famous museum in Tunis, Bardo, that was the theater of one of the most atrocious terrorist attack, where tourists were trying to get to know the culture of my part of the world through before 5 or 6 centuries ago up to now, has been the heinous, I mean, has seen the heinous act of terror that goes beyond our imagination. And I'd like to thank you and Ikram for this work you are doing, and let's go hand in hand into trying to preserve with Munir, with Hayat, with Karim and others. And talking about Karim, I'm so sorry I kept you the last one. You are our young brother, and we can say that you have joined the 2 bits of our world. You started working in Manama. I don't want to tell everybody when was that. And now you went from Al-Khalij to the Al-Muhit. And as the Arabs dream in regional integration, say, min al-Khaliji al-Muhit. And if there's somebody who's done that, it's Karim Handili. Dr. Karim, please take the floor, and you have the last word.
شكرا جزيلا. تسمعني جيدا؟
Yes.
طيب، أول شيء بما أنه الاجتماع هذا يعتبر أنه يعني صار في البحرين، بتسمحوا لي يعني أقول كلمات شوية بالبحرين مكسر مالي، يعني عشان ما أنسى اللغة، ما أنسى يعني بلدي الآخر هذا البحرين اللي عشت فيه سنوات. فشكرا نجيب على الدعوة هذه. يعني كنا قاعدين في المكتب مالك، يعني هذا الشيء مع منير، مع حياة، مع زكي، نحييهم الكل. يعني كنا يعني جالسين معاك في المكتب يعني. فشكرا للدعوة، هذه فرصة يعني أن نتبادل يعني وجهات نظر يعني وآراء في الموضوع هذا، الجائحة هذه، الكورونا هذا اللي مسوية فينا يعني أشياء يعني صعبة. أن الناس هنا زي ما ذكرت يعني في باريس هني الناس يعني دخلوا يعني في حجر صحي من جديد لمدة شهر، فالوضع يعني مو بسهل يعني. فعلى كل حال إن شاء الله يعني يجي الفرج عن قريب يعني. طيب الحين بمر الإنجليزي لو تسمح لي، يعني يكون أسهل ربما حتى على مسألة يعني التنوع الثقافي خلينا نقول يعني في الاجتماع هذا. So thank you very much again for this opportunity, I mean, to exchange with you. I think it's very interesting subject, of course. We are facing a very, very important crisis, unprecedented for many observers. As you rightly mentioned, there was a very major crisis, sanitary crisis at the beginning of the 20th century. And then just after, there was a terrible crisis in 1929. So somehow some experts see similarities in the scenario, and this is really worrying because we have the sanitary impact, we have the economic impact, the terrible impact. I mean, let's be very frank and let's be objective about the situation. Particularly that this sanitary crisis comes as an additional layer to the difficulties which culture has been facing over the last decades for a number of reasons which have already been mentioned by our colleagues before. We mentioned, for instance, of course, that sites and museums were severely impacted by this crisis. Zaki has shown those numbers which are coming from UNESCO reports about the survey we did at global level on the impact on sites and museums. There is an issue, of course, about this, is that the positive aspect of culture at some point in such a crisis becomes a major, major handicap. The fact that culture brings people together and that culture expresses itself in areas where people physically meet. The interactions, the social interactions is absolutely essential, whatever the societies are and with the diversity of countries and habits, customs, etc. This is a big issue because the impact on culture for the time being is obvious, but the impact on the long term from the economic point of view will be disastrous. Culture represented before the crisis $4,300 billion in global economy, which is a bit more than 6% of the global economy. It's a big amount of money, which has been, for which the jobs and employment and people working in the field of culture has been severely impacted. We talk about the impact on jobs. We can say, for instance, that here we face a major problem because in the creative economy sector, we have a lot of temporary jobs, seasonal jobs. We have a lot of informal jobs as well. And this is a big issue. We see it in the Maghreb, for instance, and I can give the example of Morocco. The major impact is on those people who are employed in the field of culture, but not in an official way, who have temporary jobs. And not all countries like France have the system which we call les intermittents du spectacle, which is a system that provides social security and support to those temporary jobs and seasonal jobs. This is quite an exception. We have other countries. Not all countries are like Germany, putting 50 billion euros for the support to culture. These are exceptions, unfortunately. And most of the countries will not be able to recover properly from this major impact. I'll give you an example in Mauritania, for instance. Mauritania, they were obliged to cut the budget of Ministry of Culture. They had no choice because they had to reallocate the budget of that ministry to the Ministry of Health. And they couldn't take the money from the security budget they have, as you know, the border with Mali in the Sahel region, about the unrest and terrorism, etc., etc. So for Mauritania, for instance, it's a disaster because most of the NGOs and that civil society working in the field of culture, which makes those festivals and all those cultural activities, developing and continuing to perform on the ground for people, this budget has disappeared completely. There is no money for these people. So everything has been stopped. And as you can imagine, this will have a major impact, in the near and the future, and of course on the long term. Now, if we take also good examples of some countries, take to Tunisia, for instance. Tunisia, they put a budget immediately. They tried to reallocate a big part of the budget of the Ministry of Culture. And just for the record, countries like Tunisia, Algeria, and Morocco, for instance, has been increasing their budget for culture over the last years. Of course, it's not a dramatic increase, but on the principle, it's very important that these countries, despite the economic crisis, because we talk about the crisis of today, but we had in 2008 a major economic crisis for the reasons which you know at global level. There is a series of crises. There are the social issues which these countries have been facing, etc. And nevertheless, they have been increasing the budget for culture. So this is somehow a good sign and something that was supposed to be of help in such a situation. Nevertheless, Tunisia was really impacted in a very strong way. But they did what they called the Fonds Relance Culture, which is the launch of culture. And they were able to mobilize funds for a number of actions. I will just give two examples. Interesting example, for people to benefit, for the culture actors in Tunisia, to benefit from an allocation for some money from the government, there was a call for those who are in the informal sector to enter the formal sector so they can really benefit from this help, which I think is a quite good and interesting way forward, because that was also that made things easier for the government and for the authorities to monitor and have good figures and accurate data about the situation of culture in the country. Another example was for the film festival of Gabes, which is called I don't remember exactly the name, but it's on the promotion of cinema in Tunisia. Gabes, which was supposed. That was interesting because in that case they were able to save all those efforts which they mobilized to make this festival possible, and somehow have also projection of movies and also debates online. But these were just like emergency measures, and that raises the question on how in the future these kind of festivals on movies or whatever creative industry, this can be sustainable from that point of view. Now, the online development for culture. This is interesting because there was a study about what the museums propose in terms of content, online content. First of all, the percentage of museums worldwide proposing content online is very, very low. And in many cases, it appeared that that content, from the didactical point of view, is not that much adapted to the various types of publics. So this is an issue. Now, for the museums, what is interesting is that the digitalization of the content of the museums has two advantages. The first one is somehow to propose to people an access to the content of those museums, but also it's a way to safeguard the knowledge. In September 2018, when the museum in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil burned completely, and when collections, irreplaceable collections, were lost with no record of them because there was no archiving, a proper archiving system, and there was no digital, let's say, recording of these collections, that was a major loss. So from that point of view, somehow, for museums, this crisis has accelerated somehow the digitalization process, which is for the two purposes I have mentioned. So that's good. Now, do we have to move? And this is a very important question. It's almost a philosophical question. Do we have to move for developing online museums rather than classical museums? That's a good question. And here we have real divergence of opinions on this. Now, how to access to museums and pay for those tickets online, is it possible? Yes, it is. But how to do it and how to put it in place, how to control, etc. So there is a need to adapt for the future. And here we have to say is that it's very, very complicated. There were already some reforms going on in the field of culture. And to give another example also, Zaki showed a very nice mosaics before. For instance, there was a case in Tunisia recently about an incredible mosaics found in the city of Hedra in the west of the country. And then there was a question which was raised, what to do with these mosaics. Now, traditionally, the most beautiful pieces of heritage were going to the National Museum in the capital. And that was the habit. And we could see that that was somehow an opportunity which was lost for those little villages, for those areas, which somehow through this heritage could have a potential attraction for tourism, for people to visit, then centralizing everything in the capital. In that case, creates a disbalance in terms of potential revenue for people from heritage. This is a very interesting reflection because that was already in the pipe before the crisis, and maybe in the future, that could be also a way to move on this. Now, it is true that what appears from this is that we have to think culture differently. Well, unfortunately, we knew that before the crisis, and now it is true that the crisis is somehow slowing down this reform process. And this is really very difficult because now, as I was saying, the impact now is very strong, but it will be even stronger in the coming months. We have to be very, very realistic about this. Now, thinking culture differently, it has been mentioned by the colleagues. Hayat was mentioning the very important work that Alexo is doing at institutional level, really to push countries to recognize the role of culture in development. I mean, this is still a very big fight. It's very difficult to move forward on this because still, unfortunately, culture is not considered as a priority. And this has to be very clear. And this is maybe more exacerbated in this sanitary crisis context. You can see, for instance, in France, the debate, even last night, about those, what they consider that produit de première nécessité. Now, is a book a produit de première nécessité? So this is a very strong question because all those little shops which were closed, having those big supermarkets open and proposing also books to their clients, you know, this kind of debate shows really also where we put culture. And we talk about France, so imagine about other countries where culture maybe is not considered as important. Investing in culture is something that somehow, but particularly for us as UNESCO, does not need to be demonstrated again. I mean, we talk about Bahrain, and when we see, I mean, how Sheikh Hamid Khalifa has made this incredible demonstration that investing in culture is worth taking as an option for the future. I mean, we can see it for, I mean, she was somehow a pioneer in this, I mean, in the region, and showing how much it's important, etc. So was there big progress on this? This is also a question that can be put forward. Recently in the Prado Museum in Madrid, it's very funny because it's something that even the experts knew, but somehow there was an article about the incredible the return from that is 16 euros. So it generates somehow 1 billion euro per year, just one museum. That's just the Museum of Prado. Of course, it's the major museum, but somehow 1 billion euro, a bit less, 980 something million. So that's also, but these numbers need to be used and used and used again to show to the decision makers that indeed, from the economical point of view, let's talk about money. This is an interesting investment. And that, in that case, this investment now, and I would finish with this, has to be in a way that in the future, all culture, all what is related to culture, meaning places welcoming people for cultural activities, the places hosting creative economy, the creative industries, etc. All these places have to include norms anti-COVID. In the same way, some decades ago, where there were sort of an update of the norms in the public buildings, in public spaces, norms in terms of security for people against fires, against various threats. In the future, these areas will have to be adapted to the COVID. This is sure. I mean, if we want people to go back to those cultural places, there will be need to adapt that. And that will go even to the urban level. One of the major stakes now in Beirut, and I will finish with this file we are working on for the time being, in those areas which were affected by the blasts, one of the questions is how to reconstruct and to reorganize, not only reconstruct the buildings, but even the public space in a way that it would allow, as many leaders say today, in a way to live with the COVID. Thank you.
يعطيك الصحة. Excellent. I think it's all my colleagues and the participants here will agree that you have put us into a kind of realistic way, sometimes sad, sometimes promising. You took the example of decentralization, which is quite important. I come from an area in the center of where we have a lot of sites, and many people do not know where they are from. Phoenicians, Berbers, Romans, and with some the best case you just mentioned is Hydra, this amazing mosaic discovery, and I think we had a look at that as if it was made yesterday. The colors are still there in the most bright, the most realistic aspects. You link that to what has been the concern of everybody, that what happened in the Arab Spring, basically in Tunisia, they call Arab Spring, is that those underprivileged areas were the source of instability and uprising. Imagine, or as you have said, if the cultural site sites, along with other sectors, would be led for a kind of regional sustainable development approaches, we would have been in a much better shape, and will be in a much better shape. I know that Dr. Karim has to jump to another meeting. I will thank all of you without express to you in the name of my colleagues here, my colleagues in New York and Vienna, our gratitude, our really, we feel encouraged by such a gathering. And let me ask you one thing. We are going to put in our work that will be viewed by hundreds of, if not thousands, I would say, of people. And I would like you to, you heard all of our statements, to contribute 1 or 2 paragraphs of folks without duplication or overlap. So make our job easier. We can do that. We have no problem with it. But if you think there is 1 paragraph or 2 in your statement that falls within the theme of the our gathering, cultural heritage and COVID-19 in the Arab region, assessment and perspectives, I think 2 paragraphs or 3, 1 on the assessment from your different perspectives and 1 on the perspective. We have to give the future the hope dimension and the determination and the goodwill dimension. شكرا جزيلا. نبدأ بصديقتي حياة السيدة الوحيدة. في المرة الجاية نكونوا مساواة على مستوى البانلز، وأكيد أخوي منير حول ذلك إقحام السيدة، لكن وجود سيدتين أو أنستين من IPI يضمن على الأقل على الشكل على مستوى الصورة هذا التوازن. سعيد جدا بمساهمتكم جميعا، سي منير، سي كريم، سي زكي، وإن شاء الله هذه خطوة في تتلوها خطوة أخرى. We're looking forward to additional steps in this regard, and also we'd like to see how we could get something beyond this event. What kind of recommendations you could come up with? We will put them into our to the presidency of IPI, and as you know, IPI is working with headquarters in New York with the multilateral system. Of course, UNESCO is to which we are all affiliated, and Alexo put some kind of recommendations to the Arab ministers of culture, education, and the scientific sector, and see where we could build on that for future activities. And I'm sure with the key role of Munir and Karim and Zaki and Hayat, we could build on this in order to give some substance and some forward-looking dimension to our work. I don't want this to stop as an event period. I'd like it to be, and I'm sure you all agree with me, that we should have a kind of futuristic approach to how culture in general, world heritage are in the radar screen of our communities and future generations. شكرا جزيلا والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله.